we talked a lot about creating open source projects and communities, and like CentOS has been long living. Rocky Linux, we will obviously see, but you have a lot of experience with the creation of these projects and also overseeing them throughout their journey and life cycle to different extents. From community perspective, is there something that you would mention as a key to success, and not just success in terms of achieving what the goal of the people who were creating the project, but also making it sustainable and long living? Like, is there anything that all the projects that you were there creating did similar ways that made them successful and long living, or was it different every single time?
So this is a really interesting question, because a lot of people who think about open source think about it from the perspective that they have to be a software developer to be part of open source. And I challenge that wholeheartedly. I mean, obviously, software developers are absolutely important role to open source. But for a project to become sustainable, as you mentioned, the open source project has to be good at a lot of different things. And I was just having a conversation with my community team on the Rocky and RESF side about, sponsorships. We want sponsorships. We want to engage with sponsorships. And we were talking about who is best equipped to do that, to go talk with companies and whatnot. And I'm like, a salesperson is honestly best equipped to that. But salespeople, generally speaking, are not thought of as valuable contributors to open source, or marketing people. Like, you do need to think about this to some extent. A lot of the people that contribute and are part of open source projects, they're fantastic at the areas in which they excel. So in most cases, you're talking about software developers, you're talking about engineers, etc. You need a plethora of different personalities and skill sets for an open source project to really be sustainable and successful. And we, as a community, I don't think has done a fantastic job of making this inclusive to people who are not just engineers. And I think we need to do better at that to make these open source projects even better and again, more sustainable. And when we talk about sustainability, we also have to mention, of course, the dreaded money point. Like, it takes money to run an open source project. Not all open source projects take money, but many of them do, especially the bigger ones. It takes capital, it takes resources. And at some point, it might take full-time employees to deal with some of the management of it. And how do you deal with that? So it's incredibly important to have a lot of different roles associated with that. And the one thing I've seen is, a lot of times people that come in that do not have an engineering background, they feel almost like they are in many cases, I hate to describe it like this, but I think this is true, almost like they're the second-class citizen of the open source project, and they're not actually core members, and they can never be core members of that open source project. And I think that is something that is wrong, and I think we have to do much better as an open source community in totality to fix that. And again, the last point I'll just mention on this is the value that brings is massive. And a lot of open source projects, again, there's different scopes, right? If you're talking about an open source project that has a few engineers and it's got niche users and it's very valuable to those niche users, I mean, you don't necessarily need a sales team or a revenue team or somebody to manage your operations. You don't need that. But if you've got a project that has, I'd say, over 25 people that are dedicated, to that project, maybe even approaching 50 people or more, you now have some real management problems that you have to address. And it takes much more than just a bunch of, engineers, even great engineers. Some engineers actually have some management, knacks that skills that they can leverage. But Many engineers don't want to even think about being a manager. They're like, my career path is this, not that. And as a result, a lot of open source projects lack management. They lack operations. They lack the rigor and accountability that's necessary to drive success for the users of that project. So I guess the last piece that I think is related to that is you have to know who your community is. And if your community is, again, kind of this niche group and it's not that big, but you're solving a really impactful problem for those people, that's fantastic. That is great. But if you're solving a problem for people that make their living doing whatever it is that you're providing, you have to treat them and understand their situation extremely carefully and understand that they're making decisions that could affect their livelihood on what operating system, for example, are they going to choose? And if they choose Rocky Linux, we have to recognize that that decision comes with a lot of responsibility for us. Mm-hmm. And we have to now have rigor. We have to have accountability. We have to have milestones, roadmaps, timelines, testing, QA, all of these sorts of things. And you have to spend a lot of time and effort to make sure that you are doing justice to your user community. And the first step is just knowing who your user community is.
Yep. Yeah, I think those are very important points. Like user community, like users have to be part of your ecosystem as a community. If they are not, then how on earth will you ever know whether what you're creating is actually used by anyone? Is it usable by anyone? And if you're not creating that feedback loop, it's really hard to take it into a direction that is actually benefiting the ecosystem. So if it's anything else than a hobby project, and even for hobby projects, it's nice to be in touch with the people who are actually using what you're creating. But if it's anything more than that, then having, contact with users is just a must. And I think the OpenStack community got to the point at one time to have people from the user ecosystem actually be part of the technical committee. They did have a user committee, and then it got merged together with the technical committee to have that feedback loop and representation. I'm pretty sure that there are people who think it was a great idea, and there probably are still people who think it was the worst idea ever. But I think that it is the direction to go, definitely, when it comes to open source communities and success and sustainability. And the management aspect that you brought up, I think that's another critical one, because I've seen so many projects where you would need project managers. And if a software developer turns into one, then you're either losing a good software developer, or you're ending up with a burned out person real fast, because they are trying to do two things 100%. And if you don't do them with 100%, then, it doesn't fly. And project management, that is so critical. And it is not something that's viewed as, something that someone could contribute. I think what's more accepted is, technical writers and writing documentation. That is something that got accepted as, contribution. That is not, it's not code, but it's still very technical contribution. But things like the project management angle, that's just not really, or I haven't really seen. Like, I do work for a foundation and we do have community managers, but community management and project management, those are two completely different and separate things, because my role as a community manager is to make sure that, users have a place in the ecosystem. Everyone, plays on a level playing field. The environment is welcoming, peaceful, productive. So providing a lot of supporting functions to the community, but I'm not sitting there as a project manager saying that this thing hasn't been reviewed for a while, this feature is not going anywhere. And yes, there is release management, there is this and that, but I really rarely see anyone getting involved and investing someone who's actually there to do project management and making sure that nothing falls through the cracks and those kind of things. And I'm really hoping that we will start to converge towards that, especially in bigger and busier communities where it would make a difference, like a really, really big difference.